Now I'm going to look at the ascent to God in the Gospel of John. So the Gospel of John is one of the four Gospels in the New Testament. Now, this is to provide a template for us. Okay, so it's provided a template for a scriptural account of the journey to God, right? So we'll be looking at the journey to God in various thinkers, some Christian and some who were non-Christian, who were philosophers, and we want to see how the journey to God at least in the scriptural times in the first century of Christianity was conceived. So this is in a sense giving us, roughly speaking, this is a first century early Christianity view of this ascent to God. So, like I said, we will be looking at people like Plato, who was about maybe 400 years before Christianity. We'll look at Philo, who was probably either a contemporary of Jesus or just before, but of course did not know him. So Philo is, say about there or maybe just before that. And then you have Plotinus. So Philo is Jewish, and Plato is Greek. And that's Plotinus, who is in the 200s AD. So he is a Greek philosopher. And then we'll look at Origen, who many consider the first Christian theologian, who was also in the 200s AD. And he's a Christian. And so to, in some way, look and be able to evaluate the ascent to God in these different thinkers, we want to at least get some idea of what it's like in the scriptures. Now, the Gospel of John the Gospel of John begins with the claim that there is an entity called the Word. So it begins like that. And it says, in the beginning was the Word. Now, in the Greek, that the word is the logos. Okay, now this concept of the logos was widely used in Greek thought, so it is not unique to Christianity. In fact, John's use of logos flies in the face of Greek philosophy. His use of logos is more Jewish than it is Greek. So he was not borrowing a Greek idea, he was using a Greek word to express a Jewish idea. So in Greek thought, the logos meant very many things. It meant a lot of things to different philosophers. Very often it was something of a principle of rationality. Now, in Jewish thought, it was very different. It was more an expression of God's creative power. So in the book of Genesis, which is the first book in the Bible where God creates the world, Genesis, you have this formula where God speaks, okay, and the world is created. So the word in Jewish thought was more of this very expressive, powerful aspect of God, of God's power. Now, going back to the Gospel of John, so the Logos, we'll speak about this Logos for a while. The Logos is with God. Okay, so we note that Logos is with God. Now, the Logos has been with God from the beginning, So in some ways you can say the Logos is eternal. Okay, the Logos is distinct from God. Okay, but he it is a co-creator with God. So the Gospel of John makes it clear that the Logos was there from the beginning. It's a distinct entity from God, but it's also co-creator with God. Okay, so God is never without the Logos. Now, the one very important part of this then in the Gospel of John is that at a certain point in time, the Logos becomes a human being. Okay, and that human being is Jesus Christ. Now, uh, so this becomes a monumental in the whole history of existence. Okay, and so this is what John is trying to communicate, that from that moment on, the Logos is now a human being. Okay, so if you can think of God at the, if we think of a hierarchy of being and God up there, the Logos was with God, right there with God. Okay, now the idea of the Logos is that the Logos comes from God. Okay, so Logos is not a rival competing God. It comes from God, but it's there with God. Now, this Logos now becomes a human being. And so the Logos is now forever, eternally a human being. Now, this act of becoming human has a very important name that we'll repeat very often. This is called the incarnation. Okay, so that's the and flesh becoming a human being. Okay, so the Logos is no longer understood as separate from its creation. Okay, so you think the Logos, with the God with the Logos created the world, okay, everything that was created, and God and Logos were separated from that creation. Now the Logos then becomes a human being, and now the Logos has bound himself or itself eternally to its creation. So that's a very powerful image. Now, what is the motivation for this? Why did the Logos do this? That and to do this is you become human. Um, and again, this is not simply a temporal thing; it was an eternal thing, right? So the Logos has basically eternally changed itself to become human. Why did it do that? Well, so we're looking at John's presentation. So John says the motivation, okay, was God, and God the in sort of the Christian in Christianity is known as the Father. So it was God, the Father's love for humans. Okay, so God the Father's love for humans prompted or motivated or pushed the Logos to become human. Okay, so that we could achieve union with God. Okay, so this achieving union with God was the first step was taken by God. Now, it seems like a demotion. Okay, so this is a very drastic step, right, for the eternal Logos to become a human being. It seems like a demotion. In Greek thought, this would have been unthinkable. It just wouldn't have been not even possible for Logos, the very principle of rationality that was superior to everything tangible, to actually become human. Okay, now so that's in Greek thought, it would have been unthinkable for it to have a situation like this, the incarnation. However, in Jewish thought, that wouldn't really have been too much of a problem. In fact, it wasn't. Okay, because matter, which is stuff, you can think of it stuff, the tangible things. Okay, so you can think of creation, right? That's everything that's made. Um, Matter was always potentially capable of expressing God. Okay, so um, matter always was so potentially divine. It was made that way to express God. So in Jewish thought, the idea that the Logos would become human would not have been a problem. Okay, but in Greek thought, it was a problem. Now, what we'll see is as Christianity develops, and as Christianity moves out of the Jewish matrix into a more Gentile matrix, this move of the Logos becoming, human, tended to bother a lot of Christians, and you'll find out they try to justify this. Okay, and we'll see how some do that. Okay, it is important to note though that for John, and in the scriptures in general, so I'm speaking particularly of the New Testament, and I'll just say Christianity in general, it was important that matter, again, that's just things that are created, um, is not seen as inherently evil. So that's a very important point for John and for the scriptures and for Christianity, right? So one thing, by the Logos becoming human, it's not so much a condescension or a demotion. Rather, it's shown us the value of created things that's special, that the Logos can actually be fully expressed as a human being. Okay, and so this movement of the Logos becoming human actually was to achieve the end of the goal of union. So the idea was that the Logos becomes human so that humans can become gods. Another way of saying that is that so humans could be divinized. All right, so that's the general movement here. Was the point of the Logos becoming human was that humans could become gods or become divinized. Again, but this was God's own. God initiated this by love. Okay, and the Logos became eternally human, and now this human being, Jesus Christ, is the one through whom humans can now be divinized. Now, there are a couple other things I want to say about the incarnated Logos. So I'm going to say this is the incarnated Logos, and I'll just abbreviate IL here. But the reason I'm emphasizing this again is to point out again, this when we said incarnated Logos, this is Jesus Christ, and that's the historical man who walked the face of the earth. Okay, so the Gospel of John is trying to make a very important point now, that that man is the Logos. Okay, he was born into the world. Okay, so he is a regular human being. he was born into the world. Um, that this incarnated Logos, okay, is the only Son of God, and he thus was the Messiah, the long-awaited Messiah. Um, the incarnated Logos, again, not just the Logos, but the Logos who became eternally human, okay, is the only path to God. Okay, this incarnated Logos suffered, died, and was buried. So this became very important. So the actual life of Jesus, the life of Christ, was very important to John and to the earliest Christians. They had to insist on that Jesus, the Logos, who walked the face of the earth, suffered like a human being. He actually died and was buried. Okay, and then the Christian story is that he rose from the dead physically. Okay, so again, it's not just the Logos. So it wasn't like the Logos separated from the body and then the body decayed, but the Logos went to heaven. No, the incarnated Logos rose from the dead. Okay, and um, actually physically went to heaven. Okay, I'm just going to move this to the side and continue. He went to heaven, and it's important in earliest Christianity that the incarnated Logos is understood as the beginning and end of the journey to God. Okay, so if human beings are trying to make it to God to be divinized, it begins with the incarnated Logos, right? And the incarnated Logos will be there at that point of union with God. Okay, and again, this incarnated Logos is Christ. Okay, now, so you can think of the incarnated Logos, again, who Jesus Christ, as something of a temple. It's so he would be where one can encounter God and thus have absolute union with God. Okay. So if we think of the journey or the ascent to God, so God is in this elevated place, the Christian model is that that journey is initially initiated by God out of love, okay, and that's when the Logos becomes eternally a human being, and he will remain so forever. Okay, so the incarnated Logos now becomes the doorway, so to speak, the beginning, um, and the incarnated Logos is the one in whom human beings make that journey to God, and is there at the end when this final union with God. Okay, so all of this is the incarnated Logos, who is Christ. And you can think of all of this as something like a temple. Okay, and you're going through the various stages of temple until you get to the most sacred part of the temple, where you'll find God. So that's the general model for the ascent to God in Christianity. And as we then look at the different philosophers, ancient Greek philosophers, Plato and Plotinus, and then we'll look at the Jewish philosopher Philo, we'll see what their structures of ascent to God were like. And then we'll begin to look at Christians who began to adopt that philosophical approach and that model of ascent to God, and see how to what extent they adopted the scriptural ascent to God, or if they made changes to that, and how that affects Christianity moving forward.